Hi, hello everybody. This is Dr. Randy Bach. Today is January 19, 2022, and this right here is a coronavirus conversation. It helps if you join the conversation so it can be one rather than just a coronavirus rant or monologue. Although my name is Randy, so some people have actually called me Ranty. I shouldn't tell everybody that, I guess. Um, but it's funny. We've been watching Yellowstone lately. We're up to season 2, so no spoiler alerts if you give comments. But the guys, it's mostly a guy show, cowboys and whatnot, modern day uh, drifters, criminals, cowhands, and so forth. They're mostly guys, and it's very terse. The conversation, and I guess that's not really been my style. I like to talk things through. Um, and I think it's very helpful, frankly, in terms of ending our suppression, depression, oppression, um, by figuring things out. I think it's always been. I think it's always hard. I remember being as a kid, parents would say something, and certain number of years you just kind of do it. They say it, you do it, and that's that. Um, there was a certain point along the way, my mom would tell me to do stuff, and can't remember exactly what age I was, but it was like, I was kind of pondering around, like, why this? What do you have in mind? And I realized sometimes, their logic wasn't really flawless, and you can realize that now. I mean, I don't think it takes that much work. I'm very impressed. I deal in, pretty, I guess, educated circles, it ostensibly according to degrees and credentials, and uh, I haven't really made much headway in bringing people to think outside of their own. When I say outside the box, maybe outside their television box or their boxed in circles of information. I've pointed out on previous episodes that, when Omicron came around, people trotted out the same kind of group think. Oh, the hospitals are being overwhelmed, the emergency rooms are being overwhelmed, da da da. And push comes to shove, I asked people to corroborate that and show me where the actual data was for that, and it all kind of dissolved away. It was a little bit like putting water on the Wicked Witch of the West. Um, I've mentioned maybe before that the Wizard of Oz I found very useful in dealing, and bringing up as an example to certain patients who felt powerless. I had a good ancillary part of my regular general medical practice, which I had it for decades in Revere, Massachusetts, for probably the latter 10 years of the practice, 8 years maybe. I did a fair amount of narcotic detoxification for patients, not myself. And a lot of people didn't feel they had the strength to do, sobriety, to get to sobriety. And I was reminded of the scene at the end of The Wizard of Oz, when the Tin Man, the Scarecrow, and the Cowardly Lion are looking for. Well, the Tin Man wants a heart. The Scarecrow doesn't feel he has any brains, and the Cowardly Lion looking for courage. And the wizard, of course, is not a wizard. Um, he's just a little guy, and he promotes himself as a big voice. And I think we see some of that these days in the way, our big people, I guess we've kind of made, not because of his diminutive stature per se, but Dr. Fauci into the Wizard of Oz. And he could be the good wizard. Once the Wizard of Oz was uncovered as just a guy without any really great, better insight into the situation than anybody else, or certainly no greater powers, he actually did come through. He brought to bear um, that the um, the semi-heroes of the story had those qualities, that the Cowardly Lion had shown courage, and Scarecrow had shown his wits, and the Tin Man had shown heart, and we all have these within us, and we have to really kind of not take things for face value. We have to look, and we have to work, and we also have to recognize that we have the capabilities to investigate ourselves. And so I know I've been very disappointed that a lot of the MD and MD PhDs and PhDs and so forth that I deal with, and a lot of them, more than you could, imagine, just in the regular kind of It's a Wonderful Life realm of Jimmy Stewart, in his kind of town square, where you have more like the tailor, the restaurant owner, and so forth. That tends not to be my kind of cohort or milieu. Whatnot, to a certain extent it is. I mean, I go to parties and I see people from other walks of life, but um, it seems that we congregate around, fairly educated people. But throughout, it's been the sense that the educated people are just spouting stuff, and that is not good for anybody. I'm going to go through a study by a non-medical researcher. Um, more in the economic sphere, but it's very perceptive about what has happened with the way our pandemic has been categorized and treated, and frankly aggrandized and made to be other things than it's not. I got a couple of comments here. Um, let's see. Why does the UK have more freedom than the US? We're supposed to be the land of the free. Why are they still segregated? I can't really understand that latter question. What's their ulterior motive? Well, we'll probably get to that. We're going to get to both these aspects shortly. As far as the UK opening up, I think that it's a little bit of a category error. The UK is a parliamentary system, and I think the real flaw, the real virus, if you will, that's been uncovered by this virus, a different kind of societal virus, is the parliamentary system. I love democracy, but there are different levels and kinds of democracy. The UK, Australia, and a fair amount of European countries have the prime minister, running things, not the president. And what is that? What's the difference there? Well, the prime minister is the single most important member of his party, and that party has won the parliamentary election, and they have complete control. We see this in Australia, New Zealand, Austria, Germany, to a lesser extent in France, but in the UK, when that dominant party takes over, they basically have the dictatorship, a democratic form of dictatorship. They temporarily, at least, presuming they have further free elections, they temporarily have the rule of law, and they have all the power and force of the government. Everything goes with it. We have divided government. This is by intention, checks and balances. I'm not going to do the Federalist Papers here, but we have benefited because we have, we have severed, separate states that have different actions. So, the UK is not freer than the United States per se. Their government has come to this realization very recently, this week, that they're going to lift restrictions. But overall, they have not done better than we have in regard to the pandemic. They did well. They were on the same track as Sweden initially, and then they kind of switched over. When Boris Johnson got ill, his worldview changed. I think it was different from Donald Trump getting ill. Donald Trump didn't really change his worldview. And frankly, he was older, still is, and he was at more danger from COVID than Boris Johnson, presumably. But he did not do the draconian, overbearing methods, and he didn't kind of cave into the global concept of how to deal this kind of cookie cutter, lockdown everything, kind of zero COVID policy that all the other states had, and that they were drumming, and pounding on Sweden to adopt as well. So we have had places that are more open than the UK, Florida, Texas, most of the southern states, kind of the Republican states, have been more open all along than any place in the UK. And there are certain parts of the United States that are not. And so we have the benefit, in a sense, of having an experimental laboratory between the states, so we can get kind of an equilibrium. And that keeps the federal power in check. First of all, because the federal government shouldn't be doing stuff that the states do. The federal government is really, was designed mostly for our defense and for, allowing interstate commerce and catching criminals that cross state lines with the, FBI, that kind of stuff, ultimately. But, initially it was there to, federate, to conjoin the states. A little bit like what the EU tries to do in Europe. So they have a common currency, and they're trying for a common border. They haven't really worked out the kinks for a common defense. Anyway, I don't want to go too far down that road, but the UK has come around to this realization. But our greater realization is the fragile aspect of parliamentary democracy, where when that party is in power, they have all the controls. This is never a good thing, because at its root, in a sense, I mean, the worst way, democracy can be ruled by mob. If the mob happens to believe such and such, and that they have all the levers of power, they can just go for it. So, I think the slogan is, democracy is three wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner, and it's going to be the sheep. We actually have a constitutional republic, and so we have reservation of rights, and the rights of the minority are continuous. So the federal government can't take away things. Just, when one party gets in power to become the president, he's presiding over the other, certain executive aspects, but he doesn't control the Congress. He doesn't, which can, the House of Representatives and the Senate together, and nor does he control the judicial system. So we have checks and balances. We have, separate silos of power, and this was by design, because our founders had come, essentially from the monarchical system of King George and the United Kingdom, which has the word king in it, and they didn't want that. They didn't want a concentration where one man could rule that everyone has to wear purple hats for the rest of their life, or everyone has to, walk with a limp, or whatever the king happens to decide on. That is the rule. Generally, kings don't do that, but they certainly have the ability and the power to do so. And so we came up with probably the ideal system, and the successful places on earth are those that I think most closely align with ours. And so there are a lot of governments that have presidents, and those differ slightly. Now, I'm not talking about the presidents for life like Zimbabwe or something like that, where people who call themselves president, but they're not actually in a constitutional republic. So sorry for that sidetrack, but I think it's important to realize that we need to get some good lessons out of this epidemic or pandemic or whatever it is, or this exaggeration of a severe flu initially, and what's really now kind of mild cold or whatever, and we need to get a handle on this. On a personal basis, let's see. Uh, I think it's interesting. The last couple of weeks, there was some, I getting a little bit past date, but there were New Year's parties, and there were plans for the holidays. And since then, I've been playing some squash and some tennis, and invariably people are canceling, these various events. There have been some parties and some things for candidates and this and that, and people are not showing up because they know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody who might have been positive, and they're waiting for their tests to come in. uh, it's just kind of, I can't really decide what the game is. I've been calling it octopus tag, because octopi have, they have all these tentacles, and they're all reaching out. And if you play tag with an octopus, it'd be kind of interesting. I suppose you could tag 4 different people at once. If you have a better name for it, let me know. But this kind of thing, if we didn't have the test right now, and we had amnesia, and we didn't know there was COVID going around, and we just kind of like showed up today in 2022, in our situation with, reasonable cognition and whatnot, and we didn't have PCR, we didn't have the testing, this wouldn't be anything. We wouldn't be calling this a pandemic. We'd be calling it winter, because, winter has typically had influenza. We're not hearing or talking about influenza, and it typically has colds, because frankly, it's cold. In North America, at least, a good part of it. And the cold kind of brings on, lowers your defenses for respiratory illnesses. This is not shocking. It shouldn't be, and everybody should know this and understand it. So, what we are having is kind of a weird game of, PCR telephone. So people are like, well, I don't want to be it's all this politeness stuff. And so I'm not against politeness. I get it, but people are having this thing where they, well, they don't want to be the one that, ruins everybody else's time, and they have to get tested. Anyway, so the people doing all this testing over and over again, and they hear somebody else got positive tested, and then they can't go to their party, whatever, but they're not even symptomatic. And even if they were, like, who cares? It's a cold. Don't pass it on. Try not to give it to the other person, and so forth. Um, and Anyway, so what else is new? I suppose a little bit of that. I had another friend who's probably near 70 years old, and he thinks he has a cold. He's a bright guy, and I enjoy his company. He hasn't tested apparently, and so he thinks he probably has a cold, but he's doing okay. If he gets worse, his gradation for running to the emergency room or going to the hospital is how sick he happens to be, and he's not that sick. And so whether it's Omicron or not, he's not that interested in finding out. I suppose he could get a test and whatnot, but to what purpose? I don't know. Um, What else? So I'm going to try to breeze along because I have to go to the airport tonight. My lovely wife is coming back from driving my lovely son across our lovely country, and he's moving to LA. Wish him the best of luck. Shout out. Um, and so she helped him, do all that driving, and she's got some great pictures from Arizona, which anyway, it's a good time they're having, and that's coming to an end. So I got to, kind of make sure things move along in a timely fashion. I got another question here. Um, do, 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 do. Well, I can't really. I'm going to probably come to that question later, if at all. So let's move along. I think I have some things in store for you tonight that you'll like. Let me see if I can mix them in. And I'm going to close this window here. What am I going to do first? Well, let's see. Just do. Okay, well, this is the article that I was going to spend some time with, perhaps, and let's see. No, that's good. How about this? So this is an article, come to the top here, called, very dry title, Accounting for Pandemic, Better Numbers for Management and Policy. And this is by a gentleman, Yuri Biondi, and I think he's a fellow in an institute in Italy, very well educated in economics and so forth. And this is from the journal Accounting, Economics, and Law. I'm not going to, I think I put the link up for it on the comments, but I think you should take a look at it. He goes over a lot of, frankly, the things that I've been talking about from the get-go. Where do the numbers come from? When we hear numbers of cases and whatnot, what do they mean? How reliable are they? Are they deaths with or from COVID? He kind of goes over some of this stuff here. And then the number of, how do you decide how bad this pandemic is? There's problems, deciding whether you're going to look at hospital admissions, hospital stay, and whatnot. What is the exact quantitative aspect? So, not all numbers provide information. So there's been some obfuscation, some clouding of what things actually mean by the way the numbers are being put out. And again, this is kind of a long thing to take in, so I'm not going to be able to do this justice. But there's an old expression: there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. And we've seen the misuse and manipulation thereof through the course of this. It's been an interesting thing to see of late that there have been some retractions in what we were, thought we knew. Those numbers are changing. There's an interesting article. I'm not sure if I can find it right now. Let's see. It was in the Federalist, I believe. Yeah, here we go. So I'm not. I have this one up here. Maybe I do. So this one I recommend you look at. It's not perfect, but it's really interesting. Why ruling class minions, I love that word, are so suddenly doing damage control on COVID. And we see a lot of this going on where everyone's kind of backtracking. And she points out that even the New York Times, recently had a study showing the problems from all the lockdowns and so forth. The 20-month delayed. He put this out 20 months. It's too late. Talking about the emotional, social, and academic damage done to children. And then now CNN is finally coming around to this after 2 years of smearing such things. Rochelle Walensky did it. She didn't quite acknowledge, but basically she didn't deny that the numbers of the deaths of the Wuhan virus are hugely inflated. There's been some exposés showing that maybe only 25 to 40% of the hospitalizations attributed to COVID are actually from COVID. There's a lot of testing within the hospital, so people are testing positive, but they're really having problems with COVID. I mean, alongside of COVID, they're having maybe renal cancer, and they happen to show up for COVID because there are a lot of incentives, both politically and financially. People are calling that a death from COVID if they die from it, for instance, or hospitalization. She goes over some of the term limited hangout, which goes from the Nixon era, when you're pretty much caught in something, a lie, you try to present that you have, some aspect of it, but you kind of pull back. So you limit the amount of exposure you're having by copying to, kind of copying to a smaller plea, kind of plea bargaining, and trying to get out of the entanglement you're in. So we're seeing that. Why are we seeing that now? Well, kind of because I think that they, you know, the data don't back up what people have been saying. What we're seeing. I'm going to get to my slides in a second, but what we are seeing is, that the vaccine is pretty much irrelevant to um, to the Omicron, for instance. I think the vaccine is, people are coming around to the fact of what I was saying, um, that this is a uh, this is um, basically, I love vaccines. I always make that disclaimer, but this is a vaccine for a virus that's at least 2 years old. I mean, it's 2019 COVID-19, and the 2021 version is Omicron. So that's 2 years out of date. There's no reason to think that this would do anything for it, and it doesn't. I'm going to go into some of the slides in a minute and show you that, in fact, there's, no benefit for being vaccinated as far as get coming down with COVID or not, currently, the Omicron version. So I think the vaccine had its great utility at a certain point, but not really much now. Let's see, maybe I'll just kind of go through some of the slides quickly. Maybe I'll just do news, actually. So let me get back this, put this back up here. So this is, this is how the tide is turning. The WHO now, is January 18, now says there's no evidence healthy children and adolescents need COVID boosters. They probably didn't need the COVID shot originally either, but certainly they don't need boosters. And of course, there are dangers from it. Now the WHO is finally coming around to what we've been saying all along. She mentions here, the aim is to protect the most vulnerable, to protect those at highest risk of severe disease and dying. Those are our elderly population, immunocompromised, and underlying conditions, and also health workers. Frankly, our health workers are not getting are not getting that benefited right now. They're mostly getting fired. So, bravo, but a little bit late. The other things I wanted to kind of get into tonight. Well, here's the UK. This is another piece of good news. The UK lifts COVID restrictions, says Omicron wave has peaked. Here's kind of this, silly photo, I guess. Looks very theatrical. This is January 18th. He's still wearing a mask. I don't know. That doesn't look like he's dropped restrictions. I'm sure everybody here has been super duper vaccinated and they're all asymptomatic. This is a meaningless thing that they're doing. But nonetheless, they are doing it. So that's a step in the right direction. I wanted to, these are some things on my mind, but let me just go at some of the, so let's look at the UK for instance. Like everywhere else, the case numbers, which are right here, are very high. They're sort of peaking, they're going down. But in fact, as per we've discussed elsewhere and other times, the fatalities have remained low, and they're probably exaggerated as is. Other countries have had similar issues. They've had high case numbers. Here's Israel, which is the super duper most vaccinated place on earth. People are getting, total 4 shots so far, and lo and behold, they're having more cases than they had, frankly, than ever they've had before. It's a country of maybe 10 million people, and there's 75,000 cases. I don't know. So active cases have gone up. The coronavirus deaths have pretty much peaked as before. They're very low. So this is, a distinction without a difference. It's tempest in a teapot. There's really no issue with it. Other places and states and countries have done very well. Here's our friend Sweden, which is the place that did the best example of herd immunity. Cases are going up, as you see over here, and over here on this piece over here, not the clothing, but this over here. And so the deaths are flat line. So there's really nothing, to do about this. Again, people do die, and they do die from infectious respiratory illnesses. South Africa, which is a pretty much unvaccinated place, maybe 10 or 15% of the population vaccinated. They had a lot of cases. This is Omicron. It went up and went down. So this is in the absence of vaccine, and um, really not much in the way of reflective fatalities as there were in the, I think it's the Alpha, the Beta, and the Delta strain. So that's really very much divorced. Omicron is probably, it may, be related to the original COVID-19, or it might just be related to coronaviruses such as they are, which cause the common cold. I'm just going to show you very briefly some of the, these are, I've shown these before. These are interesting charts. The colors show the different strains. This green here is Delta. This is a timeline. This is United States. Omicron kind of nudged everybody out here in purple. And that's the dominant strain. About 90, 100% of cases in the US are this. If you look around, the same thing occurs over here in the UK. Omicron, the purple, took over for the Delta. And this is pretty much the same thing all over the world. I'm not going to be able to spend too much more time on this. There's a nice thing you can look at our world in data. I was interested in looking at the case fatality rate. And this is the world case fatality rate on a moving basis. And you see it's gone down enormously. The same thing happened in the United States, mind you. The case fatality rate has become fairly minuscule. And even this is probably exaggerated because we've talked about, the probably maybe only, 25, 30, 40% of the COVID fatalities are actually from COVID per se. And again, they're mostly all elderly. We love our elderly, but everyone does leave at some point. And they're, the median is, I think, 4 comorbidities. And the median age of death is around 80, 82. So this is something that happens. 1% of humanity pretty much dies every year, regardless. And so nobody wants to live, but the case fatality rate from a case of COVID is, for that age group, probably less. It still represents only, like, I think 15 to 20% of the fatalities for the over 80 group. Age group, and I think it's still the minority of fatalities at nursing home level of health. And so the case fatality rate has gone down basically because there's so much testing going on, and all this testing, is healthy people with a marginal illness at worst. That is, say, it's not a severe illness. So just while we do our kind of world news here, Australia has decided to let COVID rip. Is that a good idea? And this is a very cautious article. It's worth reading with kind of the right point of view in mind. I'm not going to be able to do it verbatim here, but I like this part here. This is Alexandra Martinyuk, a professor of an epidemiologist in Australia. She said some states and territories really got down to very few restrictions. Is this smart? We actually don't know Omicron well enough. Should we be doing this? Well, this is it's really sad. She's an epidemiologist, I guess, but all she really needed to do was look at, where's South Africa? I have South Africa here. South Africa had Omicron, like I said earlier. They had Omicron fully a month ago. They had this whole wave over here, which began, looks like late November. And they had it and they got rid of it without vaccinations. And so Australia is all like, peeing themselves or verklempt, as Saturday Night Live used to say, over this. It's absurd. I don't know why people can't look beyond themselves. It kind of gets back to a point here from this article, which I think is very interesting. He discusses what we see here is it kind of doesn't fit on the screen. A holistic approach versus the individualistic approach. And these words are used differently. He's Italian, and he's not using the standard American kind of approach that we always think of holistic, like, chimes and candles by the bedside, and I don't know, whole grain bread. But he's talking about looking at the whole system rather than looking at individual pieces of data. And so he's using these words differently. So I recommend you caution that. But I think what we have been doing here week after week is looking at a holistic approach. That is looking at different systems as they rub up against each other. So looking at how South Africa did without a vaccine, looking at how Sweden did without lockdowns. Where's Sweden? Somewhere up here. How did Sweden do without lockdowns? They did no worse than other countries with lockdowns. And so there's an old joke before there were antiviral medicines. If you treat the flu, it takes 7 days. If you leave it alone, it takes a week. So, what's really the difference? You can do all this stuff, but it doesn't really come out in any differential aspect. So he points this out that, um, what we've done is kind of, so this is the individualistic approach, individual behavior and tracking, individual tracking count, preventive lockdowns, mass vaccinations for all. So that doesn't sound individualistic, of course, but they're looking at the virus on a person-to-person basis. They want to stop it from going person to person. The holistic approach is looking at system behavior. They're looking at statistical sampling, and he doesn't, I don't really, I think these words are kind of non-specific here, but basically, looking at how the system proceeds, and trying to focus your attention on the people who are most ill and whatnot. Um, what else? I think that's pretty much it for that. There were just a couple things tangentially that I thought, these piqued my interest. I'll just mention them to you briefly. One is, the question was about, somebody asked about the Spanish flu, and said it originated in Kansas. I don't think that's accurate. From what I've read, it actually started like all the other influenzas in China. I recommend you read this article. I'll put it as a link as well in the comments section. So these are the suspects of where the flu from 1918 came up. But I'm not trying to throw everything on China, but that is where most of our influenzas come from. It has to do with their farming techniques and bringing pigs indoors into the house to keep them safe in the winter, which is nice for the pigs, but winds up bringing these influenzas which cross species, both porcine and avian aspects. And let's see what else. This is also a little look at the past. This is from 2005, I think, 2003, excuse me, estimates of SARS death. So this is original COVID, SARS-1, as it were. And they had a really high case fatality rate. And it was just like this one. It was pretty much lower for people of younger age and healthy and whatnot. What else we have here? And this was an article, I think, 2005 from the Lancet about SARS-1. So I think it's useful to look at these things just to kind of get a perspective. It's interesting with the severity that it had, that people thought it was still a good idea to keep it around. Where's my? I lost my tab there. Sorry. Anyway, I'm going to probably get out of this and just let me get back here. And I'm going to just go quickly over some slides and memes to kind of, maybe close things out for tonight. Let's see if there are any other questions. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to probably address this unless more than I already had. So let's see, that's not right. Okay, so this is, I think, a Raphael painting over here. And this was a picture I took from the Celtic game. They were playing Philly. Doc Rivers is wearing kind of a light mask. You can see his face through it. It's his gauze. I think he's, given up on the silliness of the NBA rules that these people are wearing. They're all vaccinated. You can rest assured they're wearing masks. The players are not. The fans right behind them are not. He's not. He's, he's wearing double. He's wearing light. It's just, it's a silliness. I don't think any of them really believe this. I just kind of like the juxtaposition of the faces. I mean, people have changed. People, I think, are still people. I think they still have the same brains and reactions and whatnot. But circumstances change, and I don't know. I kind of like. I added this juxtaposition because I think it's an interesting kind of art project in a way. This is a summation of a letter I wrote today to my squash and tennis club, who insist on making the kids get vaccinated, or else they're going to have to wear masks while they're doing maximally aerobic exercise, which I think has its own issues. A lot of people I've seen who are boosted and vaccinated and whatnot, healthy, older individuals in their 60s, and frankly, one guy in his 80s wearing a mask while playing squash. Maybe he doesn't play that vigorously, but I just can't imagine his oxygen level is up to snuff, and his CO2 level is probably going too high. I think this can be a cardiac issue in and of itself. I brought up these 16 points. Maybe there were 17. I'm not sure, but a lot of them we covered tonight. The other one, which I might mention, is that China is at this point, late stage, wants to do zero COVID. This has never been successful. Australia is giving up on that. And why not? Because Omicron is mild. Um, so these are some of the points I'm bringing up that, frankly, masks are idiotic at this point. Omicron's not that bad. COVID, the numbers of deaths have been exaggerated. The draconian aspects have had their own secondary problems. We're going to have more disease of despair, addiction, and whatnot over the years. Finally, so there's some realization. People are kind of waking up against this. Even Jake Tapper is coming out. And some of these other things I'm going to show you in a little bit. My mother, actually, when she was a young girl, teenager, whatever, she wound up chaperoning Albert Einstein on his walks through Central Park because her parents had a mutual friend with Mr. Einstein, Professor Einstein. His famous quote is, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results." This, in this case, pertains to the using the older COVID booster against the current Omicron, which doesn't seem to have any association with it. And then I mentioned the NFL, that they have had no on-field communication of the virus. They're almost always from parties and whatnot, and I don't know why they are bothering to do recommend masks for people doing aerobic exercise. So that's my point. I don't know if it's going to convince anybody. Steve Kirsch, I recommend you look at. He is software. I don't know if he's a mogul or not, but he's devoted some of his time and energy to doing this, and I very much applaud him and admire him. So you can look at his, I forget which page, the name of the page, but he's pointing out what we mentioned tonight. The WHO is finally coming around to reality. This pertains to the recent Supreme Court ruling that struck down the Biden OSHA kind of backdoor anti-federalist approach to coercing companies through OSHA mandates and rules. And everyone's going to get to be free of this except for healthcare workers who are bearing the brunt. They were 2020's hero and 2021 and 2022 scapegoat. This is the absurdity. Australia wants to let it rip, as it were, and go, kind of bareback on COVID after they got everyone vaccinated and avoided the more severe versions, I guess. But they're not going to let Djokovic, defend his title in Australia. And so anybody who wins this title should, probably give it to him or have an asterisk next to his name. So I like this quote here: "A kangaroo court and a banana republic." It's actually a kangaroo republic as well. This was from one of the Australian newspapers. They didn't want him to play because he would become a talisman of a community of anti-vaccination sentiment. Oh my God, that would be so terrible. To have people, Djokovic had COVID, to have people, have the free choice to decide that they have natural immunity. They don't need a supercilious vaccination. This is to my point that the vaccine is outdated. How do we know it's outdated? Because they're making a new one. Reduction of Omicron mortality. This is funny. Basically, Omicron is so mild that when this vaccine comes out, we've never had a vaccine for the common cold for this reason, because it would reduce mortality from 0 to 0. And he's a little bit cynical here, but to my point, this underlines the fact that the current vaccine and booster and whatnot are outdated. There's a slide from last week showing there's really no correlation between being vaccinated and having Omicron. In fact, it's the obverse, it's the reverse. The 29% of the German population is unvaccinated, and only 4.42% of the population with Omicron are unvaccinated. So that's a force multiplier of about 7. I discussed this last week. And so this is from kind of a Twitter account with an interesting name. I don't know why this keeps flipping. Imagine using a condom and still getting VD and then thanking Trojan. Well, I had this happen, because we live here. I had a friend, very bright professorial type, with degrees and whatnot, and he is so thankful that he had mild Omicron because he was vaccinated and boosted and triple boosted. Uh, and 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 again, I don't know how he comes up with this because people did just as well, frankly, better without the vaccine in South Africa. So these are just some memes. I maybe put these too close together, but the left one, instead of calling conspiracy theories, we should call them spoiler alerts, because pretty much everything, like I've been saying all along, has come true. Not in terms of group dynamics, the groups always surprise and challenge, but in terms of the actual science. And it's reiterated on this one on the right here. And these are again two different cartoons. So the corporate media, decades of deceit and lies, and pretty much a year or two in this case, and then this is all Joe Rogan's fault. And everyone always listens to science, except when it's something they don't like let's do nuclear power, or the sexes are different, or whatever. It's from Ben Shapiro. The science is settled. Stop questioning the science. The science has changed. Do this. What I call blather, rinse, repeat. This from the football game. Was an unfortunate day. The Patriots got blown out, and part of the blowing out was this exhaling. Speaking of which, and it was interesting watching the masks that people had for the cold really do very little in preventing the air from coming in and out. And you could see these are aerosolized particles. How do I know that? Because this is water condensing in 4-degree Fahrenheit weather. And so these are, quickly turning to water and then probably ice or whatever. And so you're breathing in and out with a mask. Well, guess what? You're still getting the air from over here, and the masks are going to do very little in the way of preventing one thing or another. This is me with a mask, same 4-degree night. We had gone out to eat, and this is I didn't have one of my ski masks, so I borrowed I borrowed my wife's I don't know, COVID mask, and it served the purpose, so it wasn't very comfortable. And that's when you can find me with a mask when I need it for the cold. This goes back to the article about Spanish flu. I'm not going to spend time on this. This is probably the last slide of the night. This I found from somebody else. I didn't make this one up, but this is probably where you have to be. You have to be, they're all coming after you. You have to be on your own. I don't know if this is OJ's Bronco or not, but I mean, maybe it's a bad example, but they are out to get you. And I guess he became a free man ultimately, but um, but I think you have to beware and take care and separate yourself. And there's so much out there, as we've been saying, from some of the things I've shown you here. You can just go and look at the data yourself and make your own conclusions, and you can have what we call holistic approach in that regard. So what else do we have? Any other questions, comments? So if not, I'm going to call it a night. I enjoyed talking with you. Thank you very much. I'm making progress on my Zika book, and if you're interested in hearing about it, send me a note. I'll try to get you on a list to get an early copy. And if you have any ideas on how to help me promote it, I'm probably going to start out in Brazil and then bring it up here. Like a virus, like a pandemic. Maybe it'll be a book pandemic, because I think it blows up that narrative. I was speaking with a young relative of mine, and he was asking whether the Zika book was instructional for COVID. And it's not precisely the same, but I think the real operative message is you got to look at things and think through things and not take everything at face value. And like the old days, question authority and look out for your best interest and that of your family. So if you're old enough and you are sick and you want to get boosters, go for it. But if you're a young person, 10 years old, 15, 20, and you have a long term ahead of you and you've already had COVID or whatever, I think it should be discretionary. If you want to do things as society tells you to do so you can do them, fine. But take it for what it is. Anyway, have a good night. And I enjoyed having the chance to come into your house. Thanks.